The work order had been passed down through 4 hands before it reached Owen Reed, and by then the paper was soft from being folded and unfolded by people trying to find a way out of it. Thermal Regulator, Unit 41, Lower Ring, Service Crawlspace, Bay 9. Bay 9, everybody on Halden Reach knew what was in Bay 9. The last mechanic who had been offered the job had taken 3 weeks of unpaid leave instead, and nobody had blamed him. The one before that had signed the order walked halfway down the corridor and come back with a story about a bad shoulder that had never bothered him before or since. Owen read the order twice, put it in his pocket, and picked up his tool bag. The lower ring of the station was the part the visitors never saw. It smelled of hot metal and old coolant. The lights buzzed. The floor was a grid of steel plates that rang under boots, and every third plate had been walked on so many times that the pattern had worn smooth. Owen liked it down there. It was honest. Things either worked or they did not, and if they did not, you found out why. The corridor to Bay 9 had warning placards every 6 meters. Category 1, do not enter, restricted fauna. Someone had scratched a joke into one of them years ago, and someone else had scratched it out. 2 security officers stood at the bay's main hatch. They watched Owen come, and they watched him stop. Crawlspace access, Owen said, and held up the order. The taller one looked at it for a long time. His name was Barlow, and Owen had fixed his cabin heater once. You know what's in there. I know what's in there. You're going in behind the glass, not the room. Behind the glass, Owen agreed. That's where the regulator is. Barlow keyed the side panel open. He did it standing back, at arm's length, the way a man opens a door he does not fully believe in. 6 of them, he said. They don't sleep. I've watched the feed for 2 years. I have never once seen them sleep. Owen stepped through. The crawl space was a narrow steel tunnel that ran along the back wall of the containment bay, built so that maintenance staff could reach the environmental systems without ever entering the room itself. It was cold in there, colder than the corridor. Owen noticed that immediately, the way a mechanic notices a wrong sound in an engine, and he filed it away without knowing yet that it was the whole story. He crawled 40 meters on his elbows and knees and came out into a small standing alcove. On his left, a bank of grey machinery. On his right, a panel of armored glass a meter across, set into the wall, with a fine mesh grill below it where air was meant to circulate between the 2 spaces. Owen set down his bag, then he looked through the glass. The bay was large and bare and lit a hard white. There were feeding trays bolted to the floor and a drainage grate and nothing else, because nothing else had been considered necessary. The hatchlings saw him at once. They came across the floor fast and low, 6 of them, moving on 6 limbs each in a way that made the eye stumble because it did not match anything Owen had a name for. They were the length of a large dog. Their hide was dark and plated and dull, like something dragged out of a riverbed. Their heads were narrow and full of teeth, and their eyes were a pale gold with no white in them at all. They hit the glass together. Owen did not jump. He would think about that later and not be able to explain it. The glass thudded and shivered in its frame, and 6 sets of claws scraped down it, and the noise was terrible, and Owen stood there with his hands at his sides and watched. They backed off, they came again, they hit the same place. That was the thing. Owen had spent 19 years listening to machines, and the first skill any good mechanic learns is that noise has a pattern, and the pattern is the message. He watched the second charge and the third and the fourth, and every single time, all 6 of them struck the glass in the same lower left corner, in a space no wider than a dinner tray. If they wanted him, they would have come at the middle. If they wanted out, they would have spread across the whole panel and looked for a weakness. They did not. They hit one spot over and over, and then they backed away and shivered and did it again. Owen turned around and looked at the grey machinery behind him. Unit 41, Thermal Regulator. He put his hand flat on the casing. Stone cold. He got out his diagnostic wand and ran it down the housing and read the numbers and read them again. The regulator had failed 19 days ago, not degraded, failed. The heat exchange that was supposed to warm the bay's air had been dead for 19 days, and the automatic fault report had gone out and been logged and passed down through 4 sets of hands, while everyone found a reason not to walk down this corridor. Owen looked at the wall behind the machine. He looked at the layout diagram printed on the inside of the access hatch. The regulator's output vent fed into the bay through a duct that opened at floor level on the far side of the armored glass. Lower left corner. They were not attacking the glass. They were beating on the only spot in that entire cold white room where warm air was supposed to come out. Owen sat down on his heels in the narrow tunnel and looked through the panel at 6 creatures that the whole galaxy had agreed were monsters, and understood that they were freezing to death and had been screaming about it for 19 days into a room where nobody would come. Then he opened his bag and got to work. It took him 5 hours. The exchange coil was cracked and the seal had gone, and he had to fabricate a bridge from spare stock because the correct part was not on the station and would not be for a month. His back ached. His hands went numb. Behind him, the thudding went on, and then, somewhere in the 4th hour, it stopped. He did not look. He kept working. When he was done, the unit coughed and caught, and Owen felt the first push of warm air move past his face. He sat back against the tunnel wall and let out a long breath, and only then did he turn his head to the glass. They had all gone to the far corner. All 6, crowded into the space where the duct opened, pressed flat to the floor with their limbs folded under them, absolutely still. One of them was not with the others. It was the smallest, and it had come to the glass, and it had pressed its whole body against the panel where the warm air came through from Owen's side. Its eyes were half closed. It was not moving. Owen unwrapped his lunch because it was past midnight and he had not eaten. He sat with his back to the cold wall and ate a piece of bread and watched the small one breathe. It watched him back. There were 11 open jobs on the lower ring that week, and Owen did all of them in an order that made no sense to anyone except him. He fixed a door sensor on the far side of the ring on Monday and then walked back to check a coolant line that ran past Bay 9. He rebuilt a pump housing on Tuesday and then decided the vibration readings near Bay 9 needed a second look. By Thursday, nobody was asking anymore because nobody wanted to be given the job themselves, and a mechanic who volunteered to keep working near the Drakes was a mechanic you left alone and thanked quietly in your head. So Owen went back into the crawl space every day. The bay was warm now. That changed everything about the way the hatchlings moved. The frantic charging was gone. They spread out. They explored the bare floor, all of it slowly, running their claws along the seams in the plating as though checking the work. They climbed on each other. 2 of them spent an hour taking turns, pushing a feeding tray back and forth across the room until a security officer somewhere flagged it as aggressive behavior, and the report went into a file that nobody read. Owen kept notes. He did not have a notebook, so he used the back pages of his repair log, the ones meant for parts requisitions. He wrote in the shorthand he used for engine faults because that was the only way he knew how to write things down. Day 3, warm, all 6 active. Small 1 favors left rear limb, old injury not new. Day 5, feed at 800, all 6 eat. All 6 stop after 4 min paste untouched after, same yesterday. That one bothered him. He looked up the feeding protocol on a public terminal. The nutrient paste supplied to Bay 9 had been formulated 14 years earlier from the stomach contents of an adult drake recovered from the osseous surface. It was dense, heavy, and built for an animal 4 times their size. The hatchlings ate a little and then went and lay down and did not get up for hours. Owen was not a scientist. He knew nothing about biology. But he had spent his childhood on a farm station where they raised goats in a rotating drum, and he knew what an animal looked like when the food was wrong. It did not look like starving. It looked like giving up. He thought about it for 4 days. On the 9th day, he was in the crawl space at the end of a double shift, with his lunch tin open on his knees, too tired to think properly, and the smallest hatchling came and pressed against the glass the way it always did now. And Owen looked at the strip of cured meat in his hand and looked at the mesh grill below the panel. and did something he could not have justified to a single person on that station. He pushed it through. The strip fell on the far side and lay on the white floor. The small one did not move for a long moment. Then it lowered its head, took the meat, and backed away 3 steps. It did not gulp it down. It turned the strip over with a claw. It smelled it. It bit off a piece and chewed, and its head tilted, and then it ate the rest in a way that Owen could only describe to himself as careful. Then it came back to the glass and sat down. Owen's heart was going hard. He looked at what was left of his lunch. Bread, another strip of meat, a hard yellow root he had bought in the market ring and did not much like. He pushed the second strip through. This time the largest one came. It was half again the size of the others and had a ridge of paler plating down its spine, and it moved with a weight the rest did not have. It stopped short of the meat and looked at Owen through the glass for a long, long moment. Then it took the strip and carried it back to the far corner and put it down in front of a 4th hatchling that had not moved all day. Owen sat back against the tunnel wall with his mouth slightly open. He came every day after that. He stopped pretending it was about maintenance. He brought extra food from the mess and told the server it was for the night shift. He brought bread and dried fruit and thin slices of the cheap protein loaf they sold on the market ring, and he pushed it through the grill in small amounts, and he watched what they did with it. They shared it, not equally and not without argument, but they shared it. The big one always took first and always gave most of it away. The small one always got a portion, even when it did nothing to earn it. Twice Owen watched a hatchling take food, carry it to the middle of the floor, and set it down in front of another before touching any itself. Day 14, they wait now. When I come they wait at glass, no charging, no noise. Day 16, big one taps glass 3 times before I feed, every time 3. Day 19, small one puts claw on glass where my hand is, holds it there. Owen read that last line back and felt something cold move up his arms. He knew what the reports said. He had looked them up by then, all of them, 2 centuries of survey teams landing on Ossia and dying there. Ambush predators, no tool use observed, no structures, no social organization beyond opportunistic grouping. Category 1 hostile fauna, do not attempt contact, terminate on sight if encountered in numbers. He had also watched a creature give away its own food. On the 22nd day, he came down late with a heavier tin than usual and found all 6 of them already at the glass, waiting, and the big one tapped 3 times, and Owen laughed out loud in the empty tunnel because he had started tapping back without deciding to. He fed them, he talked while he did it quietly, about nothing, about a pump that had failed twice and a supervisor who filed forms wrong, the way a man talks to a dog. They listened to the sound of it. He was sure they listened. When the food was gone, he started packing up. Then the big one moved. It went to the far side of the bay, to the drainage grate, and dug at something with 1 claw. It worked at it for almost a minute. Then it came back across the floor, and it put whatever it had down by the mesh grill, and it pushed it through to Owen's side. Owen picked it up. It was a strip of insulation foil, torn from somewhere behind the grate, about the length of his hand. It had been folded, not crumpled, folded in half and in half again, the edges lined up, into a neat flat rectangle. Owen turned it over. There was no smell to it, no use to it, no nutrition in it. It was not food, and it was not a weapon, and it was not an accident. It was a thing given in return for a thing received. He sat down in the cold, narrow tunnel with a piece of folded foil in his hand and the hum of the regulator behind him, and on the other side of the armored glass, 6 sets of pale gold eyes watched him and waited to see what he would do. Owen did not sleep that night. He lay in his bunk on the crew deck and stared at the ceiling and turned the foil over and over between his fingers. By morning he had accepted that he was going to have to tell somebody, and that whoever he told was not going to believe a word of it. Il Severo had a corner office on the science deck with a window that looked down at Ossia, and she kept the shutter closed over it. She was not sentimental about the planet. She had simply learned, over 19 years of work, that the storm bands were hypnotic and that she lost 40 minutes at a time to them, and 40 minutes was a great deal when a person had 400 pages of survey data to reconcile. The knock at her door came at the wrong end of the day. She said, "Come in," without looking up. The man who entered was a mechanic. She knew this before he spoke because of the smell of coolant, and because his hands were dark in the creases, and because nobody from the science deck ever came in without an appointment. "Dr. Vero," he said, "my name is Owen Reed. I work the lower ring. I need about 10 minutes. She gave him 12 out of courtesy. He was not a good speaker. He started in the wrong place with a thermal regulator and then jumped to a feeding schedule and then back to the regulator, and Ilsa waited with her hands folded because she had learned that interrupting a nervous person only made them start again. Then he took out a greasy folded book and read out lines of shorthand that meant nothing to her. Then he put a strip of folded foil on her desk. "The big one gave me that," he said. "I gave it food. It gave me that. That's what it is." Ilsa looked at the foil for a while. "Mr. Reed," she said, "how long have you been putting unapproved organic material through the containment grill of a Category 1 quarantine bay?" He did not flinch. She gave him credit for that. 23 days. "Do you understand what you have done?" "I understand what I saw." "That is not the same thing." She stood up. She did not raise her voice because she never had to. "You have contaminated a controlled biological environment. You have introduced foreign proteins to an organism with no documented immune profile. If those animals sicken and die, the last 3 seasons of study die with them, and the record will show that a maintenance technician fed them bread. If they do not sicken, then every behavioral observation collected from now until the end of that study is compromised, because we can no longer separate natural behavior from conditioning that you applied without controls, without a protocol, and without a single person knowing." "They were freezing," Owen said. "For 19 days, nobody came." "That landed." She felt it land. She kept her face still. "And the food is wrong," he went on. "It's built off an adult. They eat 4 minutes and then they lie down. Check it. That part's not about me. You can check that in an hour." "What you are describing," Ilsa said, "is reciprocal exchange, deliberate return of a valueless object as a social act. Do you know how many species in the surveyed galaxy do that? 11. All of them have language, all of them have cities. This species has 200 years of literature that says it does not form groups larger than a hunting pair." She picked up the foil and set it down again. "A piece of foil folded twice is not evidence. It is a piece of foil." "Then come and look." "I am obligated to report this," she said. "Today I am sorry." She was a little. She still did it. The report went to Commander Del Harun of Station Security, and Harun read it twice and swore in his own language and forwarded it to Counselor Bray, and that was where it stopped being about science. Owen was pulled off the lower ring within the day. He sat in a grey room across a table from Harun for 2 hours and answered every question honestly, which he later understood had been a mistake, and then he sat in another room across from Bray, who did not ask questions at all. Bray was a small, careful man with a very clean desk. He spoke about liability. He spoke about the Joint Charter and the 4 signatory governments, and what each of them would say if it came out that a contract worker had been hand-feeding quarantined oceofauna through a grill for the better part of a month. He used the word exposure 11 times and never once meant it in a medical sense. "Your access is revoked," Bray said. "Your contract is under review. Do not go near the lower ring." "Then somebody else has to feed them," Owen said. "Properly, the paste is wrong. Please write that down." Bray did not write it down. Nobody fed them anything but the paste. The hatchlings held on for 4 days. On the 5th, they stopped coming to the glass. On the 6th, they stopped eating altogether. On the 7th, 2 of them went down and did not get up, and the medical scan read organ stress consistent with terminal decline, and the automated alert went out to the science deck at 3 in the morning. Ilsa read it standing in her dark office. Then she pulled the containment feed from the last 30 days and watched all of it at 4 times speed, which took her most of the night. She watched them wait at the glass. She watched them arrange themselves in the same 6 positions every time, in the same order, before the man arrived. She watched the largest one strike the panel 3 times, pause, and wait. She watched them stop. At dawn, she went down to the archive and requisitioned a maintenance repair log, item 41, submitted by O. Reed, which had been filed as evidence and forgotten in a locker. It was a mess. It was grease-stained and written in the private shorthand of a man who had never expected another person to read it. Half the entries were about pumps. The other half were 306 hours of continuous, time-stamped, single-observer behavioral notation on a species that had never been observed alive at close range by anyone who survived. Ilsa Vero sat on the floor of the archive with the book open on her knees and read it front to back. There was an entry on day 16. Big one taps glass 3 times before I feed. Every time, 3. She checked it against the feed. It was true. It was true on day 16 and on every day after, and on day 21 the man had begun tapping back, and on day 22 the largest hatchling had waited for him to finish before it moved. That was not conditioning. Conditioning ran one way. She closed the book. Then she walked out of the archive and across 2 decks and down into the crew quarters on the lower ring and knocked on a door at 5:30 in the morning. Owen opened it in a work shirt, unshaven, looking like a man who had not slept properly in a week. Ilsa held up the greasy repair log. "Mr. Reed," she said, "2 of them are dying. I have perhaps a day before the council orders the bay cleared. I need you to tell me exactly what you fed them, in what amounts, at what hours, and I need you to start talking right now." Nobody signed anything. That was how it worked for the next 3 weeks. There was no authorization, no protocol number, no order on file. There was a scientist who came down to the lower ring at odd hours, a mechanic whose access badge kept mysteriously working after it had been revoked, and a security commander who had stopped reviewing the door logs for Corridor 9 and did not explain why to his own staff. Delharan told himself it was containment of a problem. He had watched the feed too. He had watched a creature fold a piece of foil and hand it to a man. He had 22 years of service and a clean record and a strong dislike of things he could not explain standing behind him in the dark. So the badge kept working. They started with food, because food was the emergency. Ilsa broke down the nutrient paste and found exactly what Owen had said she would find. It was built for a mass 4 times theirs and a gut chemistry that developed later in life. She rebuilt it in 2 days using the crew mess as a supply chain and a centrifuge she was not supposed to be using at night. The 2 that had gone down came back up on the 3rd day. The small one ate first, then the big one, and then the big one carried a portion to the far corner for one that was still weak. Ilsa watched that happen with her hand over her mouth. "They do that every time," Owen said. "Yes," she said, "I see that they do." After that they stopped arguing and started working. The method was Owen's, because Owen was the only one who had a method. He had never called it that. It was just what he did: give first, ask nothing, wait, and pay attention to what came back. Ilsa turned it into a structure. They built an exchange tray into the mesh grill, a simple sliding drawer, so that objects could pass both ways without anyone opening the bay. Owen put things in it, not food, a bolt, a length of cable, a worn glove, a steel ring. Everything he put in came back. Not immediately and not always the same day, but everything came back and never alone. The bolt came back with a chip of plating beside it. The glove came back with the foil, refolded. The steel ring came back around a strip of torn duct lining, threaded through, which took the big 9 minutes of work that the camera caught in full. "That is not play," Ilsa said, watching the recording for the 5th time. "Play is repetition. This is variation on a rule. It is answering me. She stayed up that night and wrote the thing that would eventually be the core of the paper, and she wrote it in plain words because she was too tired to be careful. The drakes of Ossia were not stupid. They were not even unusually violent by the standards of large predators. What they were was a species whose entire social development ran on two things the planet almost never provided: warmth and something to spare. Ossia was a storm world. The surface was scoured, the seasons were brutal, and food came in short, violent bursts and then vanished for months. In that place, a drake that survived to adulthood survived by taking everything and giving nothing, because giving anything was death. The behavior everyone had recorded was real. It was just not the whole animal. It was what the animal became when it never once had enough. And then 2 centuries of survey teams had come down out of the sky. Armed, sealed inside suits, taking samples, taking specimens, taking ground, offering nothing, opening nothing, giving nothing. The drakes had answered them in exactly the language they were spoken to in. Nobody had ever gone first. "That's what I can't get past," Ilsa said, at 4 in the morning, sitting on an equipment crate in the crawl space with her ruined good jacket under her. 200 years, thousands of trained people, 9 full expeditions, and the variable that mattered was a man with a sandwich. Owen was working the exchange drawer and did not look up. "The variable that mattered was heat," he said. "The sandwich came after." She thought about that for a long time. The rest of the 3 weeks was the best work either of them ever did. The hatchlings began to mimic. First sound, then motion. The big one had the tapping down cold and used it deliberately now, 3 strikes, to make Owen turn around. Then it started using 2 strikes for something else, and it took them 4 days to work out that 2 meant the small one was hurt, because the small one's bad rear limb seized up in the cold, and the big one always noticed before anyone else did. They started marking. A hatchling would scratch a pattern into the plating and then look at Owen, and if he copied the pattern on the glass with a marker, all 6 would come and look at it, and one of them would go and make it again somewhere else, larger. Ilsa recorded everything. She built a comparison table against the 11 known reciprocal species and found matches in 7 of 12 markers, and then found an 8th, and stopped working for an hour because her hands were shaking too much to type. On the last good night, Owen sat on the floor of the crawl space with the panel light off and the bay light dimmed, which they had learned the hatchlings preferred, and he put his palm flat on the glass because he was tired and it was warm. The small one came over. It had grown. It moved better now that it was being fed properly, and the bad limb had straightened out with heat and time. It stopped in front of him. Then it lifted its front claw and spread the digits wide, all 4 of them, deliberately, holding them apart in a shape that its own anatomy did not naturally make, and it pressed the flat of that claw to the glass against Owen's hand. It held it there. Owen did not move. Behind him, Ilsa had stopped breathing. "Did you teach it that?" she said at last, very quietly. "No." "Did you ever do that in front of it on purpose?" "No," Owen said. "I just put my hand there. It figured out the rest." They stayed like that a long while, a man and a young drake with their hands on opposite sides of a piece of armored glass, in a cold tunnel on the bottom of a station nobody visited. Ilsa said she would have the paper drafted in a month. Owen said that sounded fine. Haran said that if either of them told his staff about the badge, he would deny all of it, and then he stayed for an hour and watched, and did not say much. For 11 days, it felt like they were going to win. On the 12th day, the station received a routing notice through the Joint Charter Network. Councillor Bray had filed a request for an external disposal ruling 26 days earlier, before any of this, because it was the option that put the decision on somebody else's desk. Somebody else had made the decision. The notice said that a sterilization vessel under Captain Norsul had been granted full authority over the specimens in Bay 9, and pending assessment, over the surface population of Ossia as well. It said the vessel was 9 days out. 9 days is not enough time to overturn 200 years, and all three of them knew it before the first day was out. They tried anyway. Ilsa did not sleep more than 4 hours a night for the whole stretch. She pulled every recording, cross-referenced every marker, wrote and rewrote a submission for the Interspecies Review Board, and burned through favors with colleagues on 3 stations to get a preliminary read on it. 2 of them wrote back with careful encouragement. One wrote back to say that if she attached her name to this, she would not be given serious work again, and that she should think hard about it, and that he was saying so as a friend. She attached her name. Harun did the quiet work. He put a hold on the disposal preparation orders using a safety inspection clause that would not survive a real look, and he bought them 4 days with it. He also moved Owen's file to the bottom of a stack on his own desk, where it sat like a stone. Owen fed them. That was all he could do, and he did it. He went down twice a day, and he ran the exchange drawer, and he talked to them about nothing, and he watched the big one get better at the tapping and the small one get bolder, and he did not tell them anything, because there was nothing he could have told them. On the 4th day, Councillor Bray moved. The notice came to Owen's quarters at 7 in the morning. Contract terminated for cause. 9 separate breaches of quarantine protocol, listed and numbered. A recommendation attached to his permanent record that he not be certified for station work in any charter system. Bray had gotten frightened, and a frightened, careful man builds a wall out of whoever is nearest. Owen read it standing in his doorway. Then he read the last page, which was an offer. If he signed a statement accepting that his actions had been unauthorized and isolated, and that no member of the science or security staff had knowledge of or involvement in them, the recommendation would be withdrawn, and he would leave Halden Reach with a clean record and a working life ahead of him. He had 11,000 credits saved. He was 36 years old. He had been a mechanic since he was 17, and he had never done anything else and did not know how. He put the offer in a drawer and went down to the lower ring. The review panel convened on the 6th day, ahead of Sol's arrival, because Bray wanted the finding on file before the vessel docked. They held it in an observation gallery above Bay 9. 14 people, 4 of them there for the charter governments, all of them looking down through reinforced glass at a bare white room. Ilsa presented for 40 minutes. She was good. She was clear, and she was careful, and she did not overreach. And Owen, standing at the back where he had been permitted on sufferance, watched several of those 14 faces begin to open. Then they ran the demonstration. It was a simple exchange, the one the hatchlings had done 400 times. A technician would place a marked object in the drawer. The big one would take it and return something in trade. That was all. Owen had asked to be the one at the drawer and had been told, reasonably, that the whole point was to show it was not about him. The technician went down into the crawl space with 2 escorts and a live feed. It went wrong in the first minute. The bay was full of noise the hatchlings had never heard, 14 people moving in a gallery above them, and the light in the gallery was bright, and the light in the bay was up at full because the panel wanted to see clearly. The 6 of them were pressed into the far corner in a knot before the technician even reached the drawer. The technician was nervous. He had a hand scanner, and he held it the way a nervous person holds a thing, tight, in a closed fist against his chest. He opened the drawer and pushed the object through and waited. The big one came, slowly low, all the way across the floor. It stopped at the drawer. It did not take the object. It looked up through the mesh at a stranger holding something in a closed hand. It waited. Owen, watching the feed, saw it wait 4 full seconds. Then it struck the drawer hard enough to tear the housing loose, and the technician's arm was still in it, and he came out with a gash from wrist to elbow and blood on the tunnel floor, and the escorts had him out of there inside 20 seconds, shouting. In the gallery, 14 people saw exactly what 200 years had promised them they would see. Bray was already talking, Ilsa was still standing with her notes in her hand and her mouth slightly open. Somebody said the word predictable out loud, and somebody else agreed. The panel filed its finding that evening. Sol's timetable moved up by 2 days. Owen went down that night after everyone had gone. The tunnel was still marked off. The drawer housing was torn open, and there was dried blood on the plating, and the emergency shutter had come down over half the glass. The bay light was on full and had been for 11 hours because nobody had gone back in to reset it. He sat down against the wall in the wreckage. They came to the glass, all 6. The big one came last and stayed furthest back, and it did not tap. Owen looked at it for a long time. Then he pulled up the feed on his handheld and watched the moment again, and a 4th time, slowed all the way down. 4 seconds. The big one had stood there 4 seconds with the object right in front of it and not taken it. Owen paused the frame on the technician's hand. Closed fist, knuckles white, something held tight inside it, unoffered, unopened, unshown. Every single exchange they had ever made, Owen had put a thing in the drawer and taken his hand away. Open, empty, every time, 400 times. He had never once held anything back. "Oh," Owen said out loud in the empty tunnel. "Oh, you weren't attacking him at all." He was in Ilsa's office 40 minutes later, and Harun was there 20 minutes after that, and Owen told them both what he had seen with the frame paused on the screen between them. "It refused the trade," he said. "It came all the way over, it waited, and it saw a closed hand with something in it and no offer. That's the one rule they have. That's the only rule. And then it did what they do on Ossia when somebody takes and doesn't give." Ilsa sat down slowly. "We cannot prove that to a panel," she said. "Not in 3 days. Intent is the one thing we cannot demonstrate." "Then we stop trying to prove anything to them," Owen said. They both looked at him. "We've been putting them behind glass and asking 14 people to decide whether they're smart," he said. "Nobody's ever offered them anything. Not the surveys, not the panel, not the whole 200 years of it. So we stop proving, we offer." Harun's face did not move. "Say the rest of it." "Open the bay," Owen said. "No glass, no weapons, no armor, no scanners, nothing in anyone's hands. One person inside with food in front of the board and Sol and every camera on this station. And that person eats first and puts the rest down and steps back." The silence went on a while. "That," Harun said at last, "is the stupidest thing I have ever heard a living man say out loud." "Yes," Owen agreed. Harun looked down at the paused frame on the screen, a white fist, 4 seconds, a creature waiting for an offer that never came. Then he pulled his terminal over and started typing. "I will authorize it," he said, "on 2 conditions. The first is that I am in the room with you." Owen swallowed. "And the second?" "That you do not tell me the odds," Harun said. "I have already worked them out, and I would rather not hear them said." Captain Norse Sol docked at Halden Reach at 9 in the morning and was standing in the observation gallery by 10. She was not what Owen had expected. He had built a picture of somebody hard and loud. What arrived was a lean, quiet officer with gray at her temples who read the whole file standing up, asked 6 questions, and then said that she would watch the demonstration before she signed anything, because she had never yet destroyed a living thing she had not first looked at. Bray objected to the demonstration 11 times in 90 minutes. Harun overruled him each time with the same flat sentence, that station security had authority over the safety of station personnel and that the personnel in question had volunteered. At noon, they lowered the bay light to half and turned off the gallery light, and the outer hatch of Bay 9 opened for the first time in 3 seasons. Owen went in with a lunch tin. Nothing else. No armor, no weapon, no scanner, no glove. Harun came in 3 steps behind him with his hands open at his sides and his sidearm left in a locker 2 decks up, which was a thing his own officers would talk about for the rest of their careers. The hatch closed behind them. Above, in the dark gallery, 14 board members and one ship captain looked down through the glass. On 3 worlds, a live feed carried it into rooms where people had stopped what they were doing. The bay was very quiet. The 6 of them were in the far corner. They had never seen a person in the room. In their entire lives, the room had been the room, and the man had been a shape behind a panel of glass, and now the shape was standing on their floor, and it was much bigger than it had looked. Owen stopped about 4 meters in and sat down on the plating. He did not move for a long time. Then the big one separated from the others and came forward. It came slowly, low, the way it had gone to the drawer 6 days earlier. Its head swung. It stopped 2 meters away, which was well inside the distance from which a thing that size can end an unarmored man, and every person in the gallery understood that at the same moment, and somebody made a small noise and was hushed. Owen opened the lunch tin on his knees. He took out a piece of bread. He held it up so it could be seen in an open hand with the fingers spread. Then he ate it. He chewed and swallowed and let them watch him do it, and he took his time because that was the part that mattered, and he had thought about it for 2 days. Not a trick, not a lure. A man showing them that the food was food and that he was taking his share first, the way they did. Then he set the open tin down on the floor in front of him. And he stood up and stepped back 3 paces. The big one looked at the tin. It looked at Owen. It looked at Harun, who had not moved at all and whose hands were still open. Then it came the rest of the way and took a piece of dried meat out of the tin, and it turned around and carried it to the far corner and put it down in front of the small one. It came back. It took another and carried that one too. It did that 3 more times before it ate anything itself, and by then all 6 of them were around the tin, and the noise in the bay was the small, ordinary noise of a group of creatures eating. In the gallery, nobody said anything at all. When the tin was empty, the small one picked it up. It got a claw under the rim and lifted it, and it held it awkwardly against its chest, and it walked across the bay to where Owen was standing. It stopped in front of him, it rose up, and it put the empty tin into his hands. Then it spread its front claw wide, all 4 digits held apart in a shape its anatomy did not naturally make, and pressed it flat against the back of his hand and held it there. Owen stood in the middle of Bay 9 with an empty tin and a young drake's claw on his skin, and above him, in a dark room, a captain who had come to sterilize a planet sat down slowly in a chair. Sul stood the order down that afternoon. She did not apologize. Owen thought about that later and decided he respected it. What she said, on the record, to the board and to 3 governments, was that she had been given a file and the file was wrong, and that she intended to say so in writing, at length, to everyone who had ever signed it. The rest did not go quickly. It never does. Ossia's quarantine status took 2 years to challenge and 4 more to change. The first contact attempts on the surface failed, all 3 of them badly, because the adult drakes down there had 200 years of reasons not to believe anything that came out of the sky and no reason at all to think this time was different. It took 11 years and a great deal of patience and a protocol that began always with food set down and hands shown empty and someone stepping back. Ilse Vero published. The paper carried her name and not Owen's because he held no credential and the journals would not take him, and she fought about that with 3 editors and lost. What she did instead was enter the repair log as primary source material in full, grease stains and pump notes and all, and it was cited for the next 40 years, and generations of students learned the phrase log of O. Reed before they ever learned it belonged to a man who fixed thermal regulators. Bray's paperwork survived him the way careful men's paperwork does. Owen's contract stayed terminated. The recommendation on his record was softened but never removed, and no charter station would take him on senior grade again. He took a job on a small relay outpost in the Ossia approach, doing the same work for less money. He was there a long time. He was the one the survey teams came to see before they went down, and he told them all the same thing, which was that the machine tells you what is wrong if you stop and listen to it, and so does everything else. The hatchlings grew. They went home eventually, all 6, and that was its own long story. Halden Reach prepared for 11 months for the first formal delegation from Ossia. They built a reception hall on the upper ring. They commissioned gifts and rehearsed statements and argued for 6 weeks about the seating. 40 protocol officers in dress uniform stood in 2 lines along a polished corridor when the shuttle docked. 4 drakes came off it, full-grown, dark and plated and enormous, and they walked past all of it. They went past the hall and past the gifts and past the officers, and they found the service stair, and they went down, all the way down, to the lower ring where the lights buzz and the floor rings under your feet. At the end of Corridor 9, there was a maintenance crawl space, and in it, a grey-haired human mechanic was sitting against the wall on his brake, with a tin open on his knees. He looked up. The largest of the 4 lowered itself down onto the plating across from him, which took some doing in that narrow space, and it set down a container of its own, and it opened it, and it took a piece out and ate it first, and then it pushed the rest across the floor and drew its hand back and spread its claws wide. Owen said, "Took you long enough." Then he put a piece of bread in his mouth and pushed his tin over, and the 2 of them sat there and ate. For 200 years, the galaxy had asked what the drakes of Ossia were. Every expedition, every scanner, every armored survey team had gone down to that storm-scoured world to find the answer, and every one of them had come back with the same one and been wrong. It took a mechanic to ask the other question, not "What are you?" "What do you want?" and "Here, you can have mine first."